Hi everyone and welcome back. So today we are going to discuss one of the most fundamental principles of the constitutional law, the rule of law under the Indian Constitution. Now, this is not just a legal concept. It is the very foundation of a democratic society. The idea that no one is above the law and that every action of the state must be governed by law is what keeps the constitutional democracy alive. In today's session, we will understand what is rule of law, its origin and evolution, its incorporation in the Indian Constitution, important articles and their purpose, and the landmark judicial interpretation. So let's talk about the origin of rule of law. The concept of rule of law was developed by A.V. Dicey, a British constitutional theorist. According to Dicey, rule of law has three core principles. First, supremacy of law. That means that no person can be punished except for a breach of law. Second, equality of law. That means that every individual, regardless of status, is subject to the same law. Third, predominance of legal spirit. This means that the rights are protected through judicial decisions. The purpose of these principles was to ensure absence of arbitrary power, accountability of the state, and protection of individual liberty. Let's talk about rule of law in the Indian Constitution. Now, although the phrase rule of law is not explicitly mentioned, its essence runs throughout the Constitution. The most important provisions include Article 14, equality before law. Article 14 guarantees equality before law, equal protection of law. The purpose of Article 14 is it was introduced to ensure that there is no arbitrary discrimination. The state acts fairly and responsibly. It directly reflects Dicey's principle of equality. Moving further, Article 21, protection of life and personal liberty. Article 21 states that no person shall be deprived of life or personal liberty except according to the procedure established by law. The purpose of this article is to protect individuals from arbitrary state action. After judicial interpretation, especially in Binka Gandhi versus Union of India, this article expanded to include fair procedure, due process, and right to dignity. Article 32, right to constitutional remedies. Now, this article allows individuals to directly approach the Supreme Court. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar called it the heart and soul of the Constitution. The purpose of this article was to ensure the enforcement of fundamental rights. Without remedies, the rights would remain meaningless. Now let's talk about rule of law and judicial review. One of the strongest pillars of rule of law is judicial review. Under Article 32 and Article 226, the courts have power to review legislative and executive actions. The purpose of this is to prevent any misuse of power, to maintain the constitutional supremacy, and to protect the citizens' right. This ensures that the Constitution remains the supreme law of that. Let's talk about rule of law versus arbitrariness. Rule of law stands in direct opposition to arbitrariness. The Supreme Court has repeatedly held that arbitrary state action violates Article 14. In case of E.P. Royappa versus State of Tamil Nadu, the court stated that equality and arbitrariness are sworn enemies. Purpose of this interpretation expand rule of law beyond formal equality into substantive fairness. Now, let's talk about the basic structure doctrine. Another important development is the basic structure doctrine. In landmark case of Kesavananda versus State of Kerala, the Supreme Court held that certain features of the Constitution cannot be amended. Rule of law is considered to be a part of this basic structure. To prevent Parliament from destroying the core values of the Constitution, this article was introduced. Let's talk about rule of law and administrative action. Rule of law also governs administrative actions. Every government authority must act within its legal limits, follow due process, and respect the principle of natural justice. This ensures accountability of the executive body. Coming down to exceptions and realities. Now, while rule of law is a foundation principle, there are certain practical exceptions. For example, special privileges are provided to the president and the governors. You have your emergency provisions. However, even these are regulated by law to balance the governance with accountability. Coming down to modern interpretation. Now, today, rule of law has evolved beyond Dicey's concept. It now includes fairness and reasonableness, transparency, and protection of human dignity. The judiciary has played a major role in this evolution. To conclude, rule of law is the backbone of the Indian Constitution. It ensures that power is not arbitrary, rights are protected, justice is accessible, and it transforms the Constitution from a document to a living reality. If you find this session helpful, do share it with your friends and fellow law students. Do let me know in the comments, do you think that rule of law is effectively implemented in India today? I will see you in the next session. Thank you so much.